Hello, good evening everybody. My name is Gareth Davis. I'm Democratic and Scrutiny Service Officer for the Glamorgan Council. I'll commence the meeting of this Governance Audit Committee for the 22nd of June 2026 at 6 p.m. Before I go into the agenda proper, can I just remind everybody to any technical issues, please use the chat function. And just remind everybody that the meeting will be recorded and the recording archived for future viewing. So straight in the agenda, and can I have nominations for the position of chair, please? Thank you.
Chapman, do I need to start by this? I'd like to nominate Gareth Chapman.
Okay, do I have any other nominations? Okay, that's seconded by Councillor Ewan Goodjohn. On the basis of no other nominations, then I'll duly ask Gareth Chapman to please take chair and chair the committee meeting. Thank you. Gareth, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth, and thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to chair for this final year before the next election. So it's a great pleasure and a great privilege to do so. Next item on the agenda is the appointment of the Vice Chair. Nomination, please, for the Vice Chair, please.
Councillor Ewan Goodjohn would like to speak, Chair.
Can I nominate Nigel Ireland, please?
Thank you, Ewan. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that, Chair.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you very much. Any other nominations? No, there are no other nominations. If I can put Nigel to the vote as Vice Chair. Anyone against, please? No, thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. Can I just say before I go to the next item on the agenda, can I firstly welcome Councillor Emma Goodjohn and Councillor Dr. Ian Johnson to this committee. Great to welcome you here and to have you participate in the Governance and Audit Committee. So a very warm welcome to you, and hopefully that that you can contribute throughout this year. So thank you for that. And can I also congratulate former Councillor Hooper on his appointment to the Welsh Government. He was obviously a great advocate of this committee and always contributed substantially. And if we could write to him and congratulate him on his appointment, that would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for that. Next item on the agenda is the apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence, Gareth?
Yes, Chair. Matthew Evans, lay member. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay. Next item on the agenda then are the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of April 2026. This is for correctness only.
Sorry, Chair. Can we just go back an item? We missed declarations of interest. Thank you.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah, sorry, item 4, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, there are none. Thank you, Gareth. Sorry about that. Thank you. Item 5 then is the minutes of the last meeting on the 13th of April, for correctness only. Someone prepared to move that they are correct record, please?
Chair, you can nominate it. You'll put the move it yourself, Chair, and hopefully we can get some seconder. Someone read them, Chair?
I have, yes. I move that they are correct records. Someone prepare a second, please. There weren't many of us at the committee.
No, but Chair, I mean, they're for noting, Chair. If there's any factual corrections, Chair, I mean, nothing's been raised by yourself, Chair. I'm sure we can proceed to the next item, Chair. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure if there was a lawyer there, they tell you that anyone can move the minutes of a meeting, because as you would in any sort of committee after an election, there may not be members of the same committee on there, but they are. I move they are correct records, so hopefully someone would have seconded it. But there we are. Thank you for that. Item 6 then on the agenda is the Audit Wales Recruitment and Retention Challenges, the right people at the right time. I think it's colleagues from Rachel, are you taking this from Wales Audit Wales?
I
Yeah.
can do, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So you obviously have, as part of your papers, you've got our Audit Wales report and you've got your officer's cover report in front of you, which you obviously will have read. So I'm not going to take you through it in a huge amount of detail, but I'll take you through the key findings. So this was a piece of work that we did in all 22 councils in Wales. And many of those reports are now starting to become available on our website if you wanted to look at those. So we looked at the recruitment and retention challenges that the council is facing, how well it understands those challenges, what it's doing in response, and how it reviews the value for money of its approaches. So we found that the council has a good understanding of its recruitment and retention challenges. So senior officers understand what roles are more difficult to recruit to and why. The council collects information that helps it to understand those challenges, and it uses a range of workforce management approaches, things like market supplements, agency staff, to help it maintain a sustainable workforce. The council has taken a range of actions to address those recruitment and retention challenges with some success. And the report sets out some of those, for example, grow your own approaches, where people are recruited at lower grades and given opportunity to develop into more senior roles, a range of well-being and reward offers, leadership and management development. I won't read them all out to you because they're set out for you there at paragraph 14. So the council's also taken steps to ensure that its recruitment processes are efficient and that talent is attracted from the full diversity of the population. And we could see also that the council has done a lot of work to develop a positive culture in the organisation so that people want to come and work here and they want to stay. We also think that senior leaders have got good oversight of the council's recruitment and retention challenges for the reasons we set out in the report in paragraph 22. Again, I'm not going to read them all out to you. The council works with others and is taking steps to increase its use of technology. So all of that is pretty positive. Slightly less positively, the council doesn't always evaluate the value for money of its approaches to recruitment and retention. The council does understand that some approaches are more or less costly than others, but it doesn't routinely monitor and review whether its approaches are representing value for money. Now, if you were to look at some of the reports for other councils, you'd see that the Vale Council is not alone in finding it challenging to assess value for money. We have made a recommendation that the council should develop arrangements to do this, to assess its value for money of its approaches. So that really is a quick run through the report. You will also see as part of your papers the management response form, where we ask the council to set out what they're going to do to address that recommendation. The detail of that is obviously for you to discuss with your officers, but I can confirm that at Audit Wales, we are satisfied that the response shows that the council has considered the recommendation, timescales are clear and reasonable, it's clear who's responsible for addressing the recommendation, and that's therefore it meets the requirements of the Code of Audit practice. Any questions at this point?
Thank you for that, Rachel, for that that run through. Can I just ask whether Tom wants to, or one of the other officers just wants to quickly deal with the management response before we deal with questions?
Evening, Chair. We've got Tracy Dickinson, Head of HR, on the call,
Thank you.
so she's going to take you through.
Thank you, Tom. Tracy?
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yes, you'll see attached to the report that there's one recommendation, and we've split that recommendation into 4 separate distinct areas. One being to consider a structured response in terms of the value for money. And we've already started work in this space. So we have our regular dashboards that are sent to our SLT and are sent across the organisation on a monthly basis. Our intention is to add further to that to look at the value for money approaches that we're going to take. We've brought our people board up to date with that just last week, actually, in the people board meeting, and we're going to be bringing a draft of that back to people boards on the 14th of July, with the intention then to have that all completed by August and ready for us to track in terms of our matrix. We've also reached out to all other 22 local authorities just to look to see whether there's any best practice. We're awaiting feedback back. We haven't had any feedback as yet, but we're also broadening that out from a commercial basis just to see if there's any good practice out there in terms of evaluating value for money. So we're well on our way to addressing those 4 points, and we're hoping that our dashboards will be ready for us to take to the first Insight board, either just before summer or just after in the autumn. So I hope that gives kind of indication as to how we are attempting to address it, and that we're well on our way to doing so already. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tracy, and thank you, Rachel. Members, any questions?
Nigel and then Dr. Johnston. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Nigel?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Rachel. Really positive report. Glad to see there's lots of good practice going on. Just a quick question, I think probably more for Tracy, which I appreciate doesn't come through in the report. I'm just wondering what the scale of the area or risk is for the local authority, just to sort of get a bit of an understanding about how much of an issue this is, and therefore what we should be taking from this in terms of positivity. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Tracy?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to come in if Tom is happy for me to. I'm making the assumption, yes. In terms of our workforce risk, it is on our risk register and it's quite significant in terms of its presence. We recognise that there's significant challenges across the organisation in terms of recruitment. From a retention perspective, actually, we're very strong. So we don't have a particular concern around retention. What we do have is pockets within the organisation where recruitment is a significant challenge. So, for example, our lawyers, our social working teams, our planners, our environmental health. And we're taking and adopting different approaches to reducing and mitigating the risks that we've got across all of those areas. What we've seen across the last couple of years is that trajectory in terms of risk is decreasing or declining. So the approaches that we're adopting is working. They're different in the different areas as you would expect, but we've got a really good grasp of it and a really good handle on it. We're working with the respective departments in order to seek to continue to bring that down. And we're quite happy to bring forward those trajectories if that was something that this group would like to look at. So yes, the risk is high. We recognise that risk is high, certainly in terms of being able to represent and work as best as we can for our citizens. But actually, we feel we've got quite a good grasp of that, quite a good handle of that, and we're working quite strongly with all of our directorates to manage that risk moving forward. I hope, Councillor, that addresses the concerns that you may have.
Thank you, Tracy. Nigel, are you happy with that response?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, I'd be welcome a bit more data, whether in a meeting or just outside of the meeting, just to understand a bit of the data behind it. But yeah, it's a great response. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Councillor Johnson?
Diolch yn
Thank you very much to Rachel and also to Tracy. People are just putting their headphones on a second, so I'm just stalling a little so that everyone can hear me. Great, this is a report that's certainly very interesting to read through. There was a fairly similar question from myself as the one Nigel's already asked, in that it's about the scale of the challenge that faces us. As a councillor, I'm well aware of the challenge of recruiting people on a number of different levels within the council. For example, on the appointment panel for senior officers, sometimes there are only one or two suitable candidates, or also in those middle levels. There's often a challenge in terms of people who work in a number of fields, who have fairly high salaries in the private sector compared to what's offered to them in the public sector. And then it can be very difficult sometimes to recruit into social care and so on. And so I'm just asking, to all intents and purposes, how much change, how much turnover, how many new roles there are. Because if I look to the value of our practices at the moment, I'd like to understand how much is happening on an annual basis. And just as part of this and part of the recruitment processes, I was part of a focus group in disadvantaged areas last year. And in there, I discussed many of the barriers that were facing people who perhaps were having problems in filling in forms and so on, and how the council was getting to grips with helping them and helping with value for money in terms of recruiting people who perhaps do have the ability to work, but face some barriers in terms of joining the institution. And so if you can give me an idea of the scale of the problem, please, and also how this fits in with ensuring that there are no barriers at any level with accessing the council. Thank you very much.
Hello, Chair, are you there, Gareth? Hello, Chair. Sorry, Chair, we can't hear you. Sorry, Chair, there's no sound coming through. Yeah, Gareth, maybe a good idea to leave and rejoin, and in your absence, we'll ask Nigel to take the chair.
Okay, Nigel.
Thank you, Nigel.
Just while we wait for Gareth's connection there, just to come back in, thank you very much for the question. Tracy, or I imagine Tracy probably, did you want to come back in on that question?
Hello, I'm happy to, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it in two parts, if that's okay. So in terms of the first question, Councillor Johnson, I think that's just in terms of the size of the concern or ask, really. And our HR dashboards does represent quite a bit of that data, particularly around aspects such as vacancy gap. I'm more than happy to share some of that information with you. I do apologise, I don't have all of these specific data in relation to numbers to hand right now, but they are split between different directorates and different departments. So we can certainly look at that. In addition to that, our annual self-assessment report will present some of that people data, and the quarter two performance report would do the same. In terms of so more than happy to provide some data around that split and what the statistical analysis looks like. In terms of the answer to the second question, which is around, I think, how we support and look at disadvantaged groups, and also how we support some of the challenges we've got in the recruitment spaces in general. Our people strategy has been designed actually to look at some of these areas. It's an area that I'm really passionate about currently. Our people board are currently looking at the people strategy to ensure that our metrics around evaluation are sophisticated enough to drill down into some of this data. To just give you some practical examples of what we've been doing. So from a senior recruitment perspective, we've removed the application form, but we retained the equalities assessment form, for instance, so we can assess equalities data that's coming through. We've removed the application form platform, and we are allowing for CV, and we've redesigned our processes around senior recruitment. As a direct result of that rescoping and restructuring, which includes amended job descriptions, amended adverts, etc., we've seen a significant increase in the application rates for our senior management recruitment. We recognise that that still means there's only 1 or 2 names that are coming forward in terms of the final stages of that, but actually the numbers that are applying are significantly up on where they may have been before. In terms of the rest of the organisation, we are again looking at certain areas where CV again has been really advantageous. So, for example, our residential care, we've now removed an application form for that, and we do CV only. We also do initial telephone-based interviewing, and that's gone down really well. And as a direct result of that, we've increased our numbers of applications to our residential care setting. We've still got some work to do in some spaces, and we recognise that. So we are actively looking at roles that perhaps could be filled in a different way. So rescoping of some roles, changing hours of some roles so that they could be done on a part-time or job share basis that would support our local economy in terms of individuals that may be able to work that perhaps can't work full-time, for instance. And we're looking at additional support that we can give to individuals in terms of supporting them with drafting their CVs so that they can make their applications in the best way. From a recruitment perspective, we do now provide the interview questions prior to interview. So we invite the candidates to come in on most, if not all, roles now moving forward, about 15 minutes, half an hour before, so that they could read the interview questions and be best prepared when they go into that interview. We've had some really good, strong feedback in relation to that. And again, we've reached out to the commercial sector to look at what best practice looks like in that space. And we're collating some responses so that we can continue to improve. We do run all this through our staff networks, which includes ABLE, GLAM and Diverse, and we produce the qualities-based dashboards so that we can look at tracking some of our protected characteristics and perhaps where we need to improve. And it does show us that we do need to improve in some areas, so we're working with those groups and with our people board on how we can look at moving that forward. Councillor Johnson, I do hope that answers your question, but if it doesn't, please draw my attention to it and I'll look at improving where I can.
Mae hwn yn
Yes, that's great in terms of this meeting, but if you are able to provide that quantitative information to us as members, I'm sure everybody would appreciate it very much.
Yes, of course.
Hi, Gareth. I see you've joined. Can we just see if your connection's okay again?
Am I in now, Gareth?
We can hear you, but no, we can't see you. So I'm not sure
Yeah. Yeah, I was just wondering, given the instability of my Wi-Fi, is it worth asking Nigel to chair? And I'll just stay on the sidelines here.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Nigel's nodding, chair, so we'll hand over to the vice chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nigel.
Just checking my connection's working. Yes. Diolch yn fawr. Thanks, Gareth. So if we can just take an action therefore for that data to be circulated to members before the next meeting, that would be great, please. Are there any other, and diolch yn fawr for the question from Councillor Johnson as well. Are there any other questions regarding this paper in the report? No. Any comments at all? No. Okay, so we're being asked to consider the findings from the report and the council's response in terms of the recommendation there, and subject to the recommendation for the report to be referred to Cabinet for their oversight and endorsement. Can I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and Councillor Johnson for seconder. Thank you very much. So if we can now move on to item 7, which is the corporate risk register, and I'm handing over to you, Tom.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nigel. Nosworth, good evening, members. Thank you for taking this report. This is the end of year report on the Council's Corporate Risk Register. It does a few things this evening. First, it gives you a picture of the end of year process. Secondly, then, it gives you a little bit of background in terms of some of the work that the team have been doing in supporting the development and delivery of the risk register. And then finally, it gives you a response to some of the specific queries that this committee raised at the last meeting when you considered corporate risk. So this is the state of play as at the end of March 2026 of the 25-26 year. And the register had 13 risks, 1 very high, 7 high risks, 2 medium high, 3 medium risks included within the register. The report outlines that all of those risks have been managed within the Council's agreed risk appetite, supported by strong governance, effective controls and sustained corporate oversight. And the report draws members' attention to the fact that internal audit, as usual, conducted a review of the Council's approach to risk management and concluded a substantial audit opinion related to the same, including the sampling of a number of individual risks. 3 risks within the register are forecast to increase in the coming year. They are information and cybersecurity, the climate change and nature emergency risk, and the digital risk. And Appendix 1 to the report sets out a rationale for the direction of travel. Tracy just mentioned within the previous item, Vice Chair, that the workforce and organisational change risk is forecast to reduce over the period for the reasons that she outlined, but is something that we are continuing to keep a close eye on because it does still remain high. All of the risks on the register have maintained their current residual risk position between Q3 and Q4, and I've mentioned the fact that 3 are forecast to increase and 1 forecast to reduce marginally over the next year. In paragraphs 4.9 onwards, the team have set out for members a description of the interdependencies within the corporate risk register. This results from a conversation and some questions at previous committees where we've looked almost at the boundaries between the different risks and the competing factors within different risks. So that section is intended to give members some assurance that those things are considered, especially when the Strategic Insight Board and strategic leadership team consider the corporate risk register as a kind of moderation activity prior to it coming to committee and then on to cabinet. Paragraph 4.16 onwards then gives committee members an update in terms of the specific questions that you raised at the Q3 consideration of the register. In relation to the major projects and regeneration risk, a report was indeed presented to Cabinet on the 28th of May, just due to officer availability. That isn't being referred to your committee this evening, but I'd like to give you assurance that it will be on the agenda for the July meeting, and I discussed that with the chair at the agenda conference. There's also some information here, members, in terms of the additional learning needs task and finish group, including the scope of that review and also the nature of the recommendations that were made, so you can see the context within which that work was done, reminding members that is the very high risk within the register, so that information is provided for that purpose. And then finally, members asked for some further information in relation to the housing and homelessness risk, specifically relating to the introduction of new legislation that imparts prevention within the process and requires the local authority, in order to comply with that, to put additional support in at an earlier stage of the homelessness pathway. And information is provided in terms of the grant from Welsh Government to support the preparatory work. And in addition, the budget setting process for 26-27 has also committed additional resources to that area of activity. And then just finally, in terms of a bit of housekeeping, the committee are asked to consider endorsing a request to Cabinet for delegated authority to be given to myself, just to make any further non-material operational updates to the risk management strategy throughout the year. Obviously, anything that would have a material effect on the strategy would be brought for members to consider prior to making them. So that's a really quick overview, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tom, for that. And very, if I can say it as well, a very quick run through, which is great. We've read the report, so that's really useful just to give us that summary. So thank you for that. Are there any questions at all? Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Tom. It's very interesting. As many of you are already aware, I'm a former member of that committee, so rejoining this year after taking an absence of some 4 years, so I'm fairly familiar with the process by now, and I'm also familiar with this sort of document. However, perhaps by returning to this committee after a small absence, I'm also looking at this risk score as some kind of frog slowly boiling, because there are a number of scores here which are very high, and that frightens somebody from the perspective of looking at this, perhaps having not seen it in previous years, especially the one regarding additional learning needs, which has the highest score. And it does frighten me to look upon this and a number of others which are also very high, because it looks as though there is a lack of a way of standardizing some of these. So just very quickly, because I am coming to you new to the present situation from the perspective of this committee, may I please ask, what is the process of standardizing and making sure that the scores are fair and fair reflections? What is the process of looking at these, and what is the difference between the original score, if you like, and what the score is after the council looks at trying to mitigate the risk? Because it looks as though this isn't extremely effective at the moment. Also, there was mention made of work done by the Flying Starts Committee recently on additional learning needs. And is there an intention for this committee to look into the matter or to discuss this in more detail, since it's not completely unacceptable to have something on the highest risk score, but if that really is the score, it should be raised elsewhere and in more detail and with more, and somewhere where there is more power somewhere else within the council, because this should be the highest priority for everything council does if it's of such a high risk. So I'd just like to ask that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. In terms of the ALN risk, if I do it in reverse order, if that's okay. Absolutely. In terms of the committee, have in previous meetings have asked for further information relating to the ALN risk. So certainly the way that I'm trying to present the risk register to the committee is to allow you to then ask for more detailed information relating to specific risks, if that's useful. And within the background papers to the report, you've got access to the full documentation in terms of providing information on those risks. But you're absolutely right in terms of what almost the so what, once you get to a very high risk, what is it that we're actually doing? And it's the answer is a number of different things. One is that it will inform some of the discussion and deliberations in terms of budget setting proposals. So we obviously look at where we can mitigate through the use of resources, for example. I'm aware as well that in the last couple of weeks, piece of work is being done by the WLGA, as well as the Directors of Education, looking at the arrangements for ALN, particularly in light of the consequentials that may or may not be forthcoming into Wales as a result result of the SEND changes within England. So there's some lobbying and representation, if you like, of the Welsh position in terms of ALN. This particular stream of work is also one of the most important areas of focus for the Learning and Skills Directorate. So as part of the reshaping programme, they've got a series of work looking at how additional learning needs and ALN in the round are being managed, and the different approaches that may or may not need to be adopted in order to make sure that that children with those needs are supported, and also with one eye on obviously the affordability of being able to do so. So the risk scoring, in effect, and ALN is a good example, is something that's a catalyst then for us doing further work as a result. To answer the first question relating to the process for standardising the risk scores, for committee members, the process is that once a risk is identified and on the register on a quarterly basis, the risk owner is asked to update the documentation associated with their risks. They're asked to consider if there have been any changes materially in the risk environment, if there have been any new controls that have been introduced during that period, and the impact on those controls have on the inherent nature of the risk, and therefore what happens to the residual risk score. Once we've had those pieces of work done independently of one another, initially one of my teams will do a piece of moderation looking across all of the risks, especially looking at whether there have been any movements, or indeed if there have been no movements but we perhaps would have expected there to be. So there's some back and forth in terms of internal challenge. We then take the register in the same report as you see this evening to the Strategic Insight Board. So that is a board that I chair, has my heads of service, but also senior representatives from across the organisation. So we have a discussion that is based around moderation as well. And that group also then reports to the strategic leadership team, where we look at this alongside our quarterly performance reporting. So we see how the two sides of things sit together. The question around where you see effectiveness of control scores in the sort of 1 and 2, so where they're having low or medium impacts in terms of the of mitigating that inherent risk, some of that is down to the nature of the risks that are being managed within the register. So some things we have more control over than others. So the WICIS transition, for example, has a high level of control, so therefore dampens that risk quite significantly. Whereas in other areas of work, sometimes, for example, financial resources, where we're seeing really strong growth in demand and complexity at a time when funding hasn't historically kept pace, that represents why a lower risk score, a lower effectiveness of control score is used there. So and then just finally to conclude, this is one of those exercises as well where we're almost comparing very different things, so trying to introduce that level of standardisation so members can see the relative risks is really important. And obviously the committee's challenge and deliberation around how reflective that feels to you as members is really important as part of that process.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much for your response. It was very thorough. Thank you, Tom. I'm very interested in the process of standardizing, just in terms of making sure that it all works, because if you do look at them, there are 13 matters on this risk register. 16, of course, is the highest score, the second most high risk possible under this process, with this 4x4, 4x3, and so there's no way of having something between 12 and 16 as a score. And so you see there are 7 matters on the risk register which score a 12, or there's that one that's 16, which is more than half of the possible risk on that register. And so that question of standardizing, this comes from my own my own experience years ago of, you know, seeing whether this is going to have an impact, if it is going to be something that causes problems, trying to assess that. That's what's at the core of the question. But I'm not sure in this instance, as somebody who is coming newly to look at this register with fresh eyes, how I am to see or understand a level of risk when over half of the matters listed on the risk register, you know, are in those two highest possible levels. Is there a way? Well, are they all on that same level really? Or is it just that a problem that arises in terms of how the scores are added up? I don't want to go really deeply into it, Tom, but I'm just trying to understand for myself. If almost half of these things are very high risk, are they all genuinely the same level of risk?
That's a really tough question, Councillor Johnson. I'm going to do my best to give you an answer. And I suppose the level of complexity in comparing those issues, some of which are council-wide, some of which are kind of service-specific, it is a real challenge. And it's one of the reasons why within the risk pack, you've also got the heat map, which shows the different aspects of risk in terms of political and legislative resources, well-being, and reputation, and goes into further information there as well to show how those different component parts of the risk are measured and how they compare against one another. By its very nature, in order to get onto the corporate risk register, it needs to, an individual risk needs to meet a particular threshold whereby it's either considered very significant within an individual directorate, or indeed it has a council-wide implication. So sitting behind this is a series of directorate or service level risks which are managed within the organisation and would only come onto the risk register at a time when they were particularly risky. And an example of that would be something like the Welsh Community Care Information System, that actually if that was not as risky as it was, it may well just be a risk managed within social services, because obviously it has such significance. It gets brought onto this agenda. There is absolutely a quirk of whenever we use matrices on these kind of grids, that you do have that cliff between the different categories, and I think that's something that, you know, within risk management practice is probably accepted, and the important thing, I suppose, is not necessarily to look at the individual risk scores of or the risk scores of individual risks, but is to look at the direction of travel within the period, the forecast direction of travel, and whether, as a committee, you feel that there's sufficient, that you have sufficient assurance that the management controls are in place to manage those things, because we very much try and keep that comparison accurate and level, but by its very nature, sometimes some things are difficult to compare, but yes, would be equally risky.
Okay, thanks for that. A good discussion. I think maybe just worth considering with the change in membership of the committee as well, and wider changes as well, whether another risk refresher offline again between meetings might be something to consider. So just perhaps something to have a chat through. I think when I joined as well, there was a question over 5x5 matrices instead of 4x4. Not one for the committee now, but yeah, something just to get a refresher and understanding on would be really good from that. Are there any other questions, Councillor Hooper? Oh, good, John. Sorry,
That's absolutely fine.
Sorry,
I need to be
Councillor
compared to
Goodjob.
the minister. So, can the director please define for me the forecast direction of travel of the risk?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. So the forecast direction of travel for a risk is what we anticipate over the next 12 months or sooner in terms of that risk increasing, decreasing or remaining the same. So an example of that one from your pack this evening, our forecast direction of travel on additional learning needs is that it will remain at a very high level throughout the coming period.
Thank you. So I'm taking on the mantle of Councillor Hooper here regarding the climate change risk. I think that this has been forecast direction of travel to increase for over 12 months now, is my understanding, and we've brought it before SLT before by a recommendation, and they said that it was too early to say whether this was to increase towards a very high risk. And yet we continue to see that there's a lack of mitigation regarding the risk by its inherent nature and the controls that we have over it. My ask would be, can this be reviewed again?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Certainly we can undertake to review that particular risk. Indeed, some work is underway to do that. We during this the period just after this register relates to, the Public Services Board Climate Change Risk Assessment piece of work was concluded. That's a really important piece of analysis work that the PSB are now considering in draft and looking at the response to. Indeed, we obviously are awaiting the new Welsh Government programme for government as well in terms of the direction for Welsh Government in policy terms for climate change, and that needs to play into the considerations as well. But absolutely, if committee would like us to undertake that review as to the risk scoring relating to that particular risk, obviously no problem at all to do that.
Thank you. And just to piggyback on the points made by Councillor Johnson there, I wanted to ask about many of those high-level risks. I would argue, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, Director, as to the root cause as to many of these issues. So when we're talking about social care demand, when we're talking about workplace change, financial resources, school budgets, that the inevitable failure of this is that we have certain statutory duties that we must meet by law, and quite rightly so, and however the income that the council receives with which to spend, with which to meet those demands, is limited by council tax and by the grants that we receive from central government. And there is a cultural factor within the council, and quite rightly so, which is very hostile towards increases of council tax because it impacts severely, especially on the poorest residents in our community. And so is there not an inherent risk regarding many of these issues that cannot be severely controlled by the council or the administration, whoever's in administration, due to the fact of the limitations placed upon councils and all councils within Wales and England as well?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. I think in part you answered the first part of your question in terms of the root cause of those risks, and that's not me being presumptuous. I think you described really accurately the fact that the root cause of many of these risks is about the level of resource, the level of demand, the duties or policy that is required of the local authority. And I suppose I would add perhaps into that expectation as well, both of elected members, but importantly the public. So there's lots of things at play in terms of the root causes of those risks. And indeed, some of the risks almost in of themselves are the root causes. So things like financial resources, workforce risks play across physical assets. They play across a huge amount, because that's about the amount of resource we've got available, the people that we've got to do it, and the assets that we've got available or at our disposal in order to discharge those things. And then you see specific risks coming through the register. This committee discussing housing and homelessness legislation last time, for example, looking at the additional or new duties placed by Welsh Government on the council and our ability to respond to those things. In terms of the question as to are there some things that we can't do things about, I suppose my answer would be there are things that we there are some risks that we can do less about, but that doesn't mean that we ought to not keep trying. So, for example, in the financial resources risk, there are some very relatively easy binary choices that could be made in terms of cutting or putting up council tax or making cuts in spending or divesting in services, for example, whereas our approach to that risk is more based on the medium-term financial sustainability of the organisation through things like the reshaping programme, looking at different ways of doing things in order to leverage those savings. And ditto climate change and nature emergencies, you could look at this and think, well, there's only an effectiveness of control score of 1. Why are you even bothering? Well, the answer is that actually within Scope 1 emissions, for example, we are seeing a demonstrable impact of this council's activities in decarbonising things within our control. It's where we've got less control within the supply chain that actually it's a more tricky challenge. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't take on that challenge. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Some good discussions there. I think there's a general theme in the questions there. I think it's in 4.10 of your report about financial sustainability. Ongoing structural funding pressures mean that elevated residual risk has been explicitly and knowingly tolerated across several areas, supported by strong corporate oversight and escalation arrangements. I guess I think the bit of a theme from the room here is, or the questions raised, is just how long is that sustainable for? And not a question for now, but I think it's something to reflect in future papers. It's just, there's the things the council has to do, and there's the things the council chooses to do. And I suppose from our side, we need to understand a bit more about that in terms of through the risk register of exactly how is, which ones should we be really worried about, and how sustainable is that going forwards. But yeah, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm conscious of time, but if there are any questions, we want to make sure we give everyone the opportunity. Nope. Any comments at all? Yep.
So some comments to add to recommendations on top of what we asked about the reviewing of the climate change risk. Myself, I'm not satisfied with the amount of information provided about the ALN task and finish. I myself would either like some more information in the next risk register update or a separate paper regarding it so we can discuss it properly as a committee and the implications of it, and not just the paper itself, but more so the cabinet response to that and the effectiveness of the controls of that risk based on the task and finish and other work taking place to ALN. The other thing I'd ask is, based on the discussion that we've all had, is to at some point look at when we are going to entirely review risk and the way that we measure it as part of the risk register. I think that needs to happen at some point. I'm not going to say that that has to happen now, and perhaps that can happen around the election cycle, but it does raise a large point that the inherent risk, every single risk is at very high or high, and the only thing that's making some things low is the effectiveness of controls, which doesn't even make some risks low. And added on top of that, what I would determined to be somewhat of a blunder was the decision a couple of years ago where we decided to remove a number of risks that were determined to be low, that we determined not to be of significant enough value to this committee or to the organisation to continuing to be on the corporate risk register, and how that then trickles down into the effects on directorate risk and service level risks. That's not a discussion for this committee, but I think that I need assurance that there's going to be a review of that situation based on the fact that over time, the risk register, as it seems, has been reducing in effectiveness would be my determination, but others may disagree with me.
Yeah, I think on that, I think that comes back to the potential discussion around risk as well and how that works. I think there's a distinguishing factor there between how it works for the authority itself in terms of day-to-day and how it's working for us as well. I think, Tom, did you want to come back in quickly on that?
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Vice Chair. And certainly we can provide that information in terms of task and finish. I just wanted to clarify for members that a proportion of the risks on the register are high or very high. There are medium, high and medium risks on the register as well at a residual level. And just to give some assurance to committee that the corporate risk strategy is kept under review on a continual basis. We are part of a national group that looks at risk management. I have people who are trained in risk management within the team. So I just want to provide assurance that the framework is certainly kept in that way, and as part of the moderation and an oversight piece of work within the organisation, we do seek to make sure that there are regular reviews of the effectiveness of risk management. So obviously within the self-assessment report that'll come to the Joint Performance Committee and indeed to yourselves in the next couple of months, there is a section around governance, and you'll see as part of that where the risk management framework comes in. So I just wanted to provide some additional context to the comments around the effectiveness of the Council's risk management arrangements.
Just to say, I'm not satisfied that the consistent review of the risk register is a holistic view of everything that's occurring, taking a step back and determining what's best for the organisation 5 to 10 years in the future. That's what I'm looking for. I haven't seen that happen yet, and either that can happen but on a formal basis, that we sit down and have a review of it, or that can happen over time, over the next couple of years, into the next corporate, into the rest of the corporate plan. I don't care how it happens. I'm just saying that perhaps that's something the organisation should consider, is having that holistic review.
Okay, thank you. So I think if we can just take, there's a conversation to happen outside of the meeting about how best we take that forward. But yeah, absolutely, Councillor Goodjohn, your point is taken forward. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on the? No. I think just on the recommendation regarding delegated authority for the changes, I think from my experience, things like policies shouldn't have that much change in between. A policy is set, it should be kind of, that's the way the organisation works. If there are non-material things that would be changed in that policy, that's where probably a procedure or something would be more effective in terms of that sort of change. But I think if they are non-material, as long as, I don't know how you assess non-material versus material, but I think we can take that forward. But just being aware of that, I guess, is just that difference between policy and procedural change. I wouldn't want anything significant to be changed. Okay, if there are no other questions or comments, then there are 4 recommendations in the paper, plus there's a recommendation. Well, we'll take those, the first 4 in there. Are we all happy to approve the first 4 in there? Can I have a proposer? Councillor Goodjohn and Councillor Emma Goodjohn. Thank you. And then in terms of, there was an additional recommendation to have a report brought back to the committee on, is it ALN? The ALN Task and Finish Group.
Can I just clarify something there, Chair? Just to outline that, all the report is available on the scrutiny webpage. I think it was covering ALN resource bases, not just ALN as a whole. So it will be quite limited in just to clarify that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the SLT review on climate change. So can we take those? We'll take those again. We'll take those as yes. We'll take those forwards. Exactly the format of those again. Perhaps we can discuss outside of the meeting. But yeah, everyone can have a proposer for those then, and a seconder. Okay. Thank you very much for that one. So that was item 7. Item 8 then is the Q4 25-26 progress against external regulatory recommendations. Tom, is that you again?
It is. Thank you very much indeed, Vice Chair. So this is a housekeeping report that the committee receive on a 6-monthly basis. This report is pulled together as a result of the recommendations made by external regulators, predominantly Audit Wales, but also CIW and ESTIN as well at a corporate level. When your committee, and as an example, you saw the recruitment and retention item first up this evening, and considered the response to the recommendations that have been made by Audit Wales. Once Cabinet accept those recommendations, they go into this tracker so that we've got an oversight of all of the recommendations that are made by the regulators. And importantly, as a committee, then you've got oversight in terms of the responses to those. So this is the position as at the end of the 25-26 year. There are 29 outstanding regulatory recommendations. The report gives you a breakdown that 4 of those relate to national studies where the regulators have done a piece of work and made recommendations for all local authorities, and 24 are where the regulators have made recommendations for this organisation, so to respond to. In response to the committee's suggestions, we've introduced high, medium and low priority responses to those recommendations. So you can see across both the national and the local recommendations where the number of those items that fall into each of those categories. We had a discussion the last time that we brought this report to committee where there were some questions about is the council going to deliver all of these actions by the target date? And I think I gave an answer that didn't exactly answer the question necessarily, but committed to doing my best to make sure that the organisation did. And in the majority of instances, that is the case. However, the report does draw attention at paragraph 4.7 to a number of regulatory recommendations where colleagues, including myself, have asked for revised target timescales. In preempting some of the questions that we would expect, obviously, from members of Governance and Audit Committee, Appendix 1 does set out for members the rationale for each of those requests for extended timescales. The majority of them relate to external dependencies, constraints within the organisation, or indeed time to allow things to become sufficiently embedded within the organisation. But work is underway against each of those recommendations. There isn't a hiatus on any of them. The report is being brought to yourselves this evening, Vice Chair, in order to provide members with the opportunity to see that process and the end of year position. We're asking for permission to close down one of the actions relating to equality impact assessments, as that is considered to be complete now. And then this information will form part of the Council self-assessment report, which will be considered next month by members of this committee, but also the Joint Performance Scrutiny Committee as well. So that's a really quick overview, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Tom, are there any questions? Councillor Goodjohn?
One quick one, Tom will be happy to know. Just on the panel performance assessment and their recommendations, they're less so recommendations that are one and done, things that we just do and then forget. It's things that need to be embedded as part of the corporate plan and our ways of working. So I would ask, is having each year having its own target date, does that make sense as part of this report? Would it not make more sense to have a target date, say, at the end of the corporate plan, and then it's always on this list, it's always under review, and we can always get the information back as to how progress is being made on those recommendations in the future?
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. The simple answer is yes, or possibly. The other alternative to that is that that as a committee you ask for us to be more specific about the actions that we're going to be taking within the year to respond. I think the point you make in terms of the panel performance assessment recommendations is a good one in the sense that they are, by their very nature, slightly more longer term in some instances, whereas some are more straightforward. So, for example, the scrutiny one that will have a defined end date, whereas signalling change associated with the corporate plan and how do we involve our communities more is clearly going to be something that's ongoing. So if committee were minded to recommend it to Cabinet, we could certainly consider whether we just put slightly longer stop dates on some of these, highlight that to the committee to make sure that as members you're comfortable that that's an acceptable response, or indeed if committee felt that you would welcome more specific actions within the year, we could equally do that. But I think both would achieve what you're looking for, Councillor Johnson, but obviously for members to determine.
I think one of the things I was going to raise regarding this report was around kind of the purpose of it in terms of oversight, and the fact that I asked about the March 2026 deadline ones in December and asked how they were going, and as you said in your introduction there, it was a response which said, well, we'll kind of know by 31st of March how well that's going, and now I think it's 14 have been extended to March 2027 or beyond, so a year. We're now receiving that information in June. 3 months after the deadline has passed. So I think there's something here about the purpose of this report and trying to, having effective oversight of these actions. So I think in terms of that discussion there, I think an end date with the corporate plan makes sense, but with actual milestones along the way, so we can actually see that progress, how that's working and how that's progressing, to make sure the outcomes are being achieved, would be a really useful way of doing that. Does that, Councillor Goodjohn? Yeah, that fits yours. So yeah, I think that would be really useful. But it is about, I think, the things that come to this committee, we need to be making sure there's value in them, there's something useful coming out of them, and that knowing that we're actually keeping on top of those dates, making sure that's working, will add that value, rather than just going, okay, they've been extended by another year, we're not going to do it. Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Diolch i
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn and Nigel. It's an interesting discussion because I certainly wasn't aware of the previous discussion regarding this. And what struck me, and Tom of course will predict this, is the fact that on a surface level, the report looks as if it's in a fairly healthy place because there's so much green to be seen and so little reds or indeed yellow or amber in the tracker. But when you look at the target dates, you realise actually that there's been a lot of slippage from the financial year, which is finished, and has been pushed to the next year. Well, the current year, which is the end of March 27. And so, yes, it looks very different. So there is a question to be asked in terms of, how we get to grips with dealing with things. And I'm happy that we have if we have the experience of Councillor Goodjohn and the Deputy Chair, that this needs another way of being presented to us, because it doesn't strike me as a fair thing to give a target of March in 1 year, then to come back to us perhaps in the summer and say, oh yes, this is still green, if this is now to be achieved a year after the target date. There was an intention to the target date in the first instance, or not, because if you're trying to achieve it before a certain date, is there a purpose to the target date of next March? If this still won't be achieved for whatever reasons, it's just that when I see on a surface level something that's full of green and only a little is in amber and there is nothing at all in red, it looks as though everything is very healthy. But if you scratch beneath the surface, you can see that everything has slipped in a year, or a number of things have slipped by a year. Obviously, something else is going on as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I'll take Chair's privilege there as well. Was one of my questions linked to that was also, what does the red, amber, green mean? Because it doesn't, the green doesn't mean what I think it means from this, which would be the same thing. So, Tom, did you want to come back on those?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. And I think it's absolutely fair challenge. The target dates have moved in a number of the recommendations, the 14, for a variety of reasons, and there's a description of each of the reasons within the report for, importantly for transparency in terms of why those things have been moved. And the RAG status is based then on that revised timeline. As you say, a number of reasons there can be a number of reasons for that that shift in deadline. The overall purpose of this piece of activity within the organisation is to make sure that we have got an integrated handle on all of these recommendations, and as elected members and lay members, you importantly have got oversight about the progress being made, and also sometimes the challenges that exist within responding to the regulatory recommendations. We obviously discuss this on a regular basis with Audit Wales as well, to keep them abreast of the potential challenges or the progress that we're making in responding to the recommendations. I think the suggestion, Vice Chair, that you had of that sort of third way of having longer stop dates, but with longer stop dates with milestone actions is part of that. There's also something about we don't want to be slavishly delivering the action that we set out at the very beginning in a response to a piece of regulatory report if the world changes and there's a different way to do things. So there is some flexibility there. can certainly, based on the discussion, and if committee were minded to make the recommendation for us to have a look at how we present this report, always happy to do that. The important thing is that it works for you as elected members, as well as internally for us as officers. So always happy to reflect on the committee's considerations. So we can certainly do that.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other questions or comments? Sorry, questions? Nothing on there. In terms of comments, Tom, I mentioned it to you beforehand, but I think something's gone a bit awry with the referencing in here as well. There was some with the same reference in the committee, the report in December, that are now different audits and different actions. So I think if we can just check that before the next version of this. Are there any other comments at all? No. Okay, so I think we've got the recommendations that are in the paper about that we've reviewed the progress, and also that we refer any views and recommendations to Cabinet. I think one thing I think is just worth considering is the timing of this report as well. If there's so many actions that are coming due in 31st of March, and that's the majority of the actions, potentially wait until June for the report might not be the best of timing. So again, not stating it has to come earlier in the year, but perhaps it would add more value if it came in the April meeting. So perhaps something to look at as part of the forward programme. Other than that, are we happy to approve the recommendations in the report? See nods. Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn. Councillor Goodjohn, thank you. Okay, moving on to paper 9 then, which is the Governance and Audit Committee Decision and Action Tracking paper.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, for some members, this will be a new report. I'm looking at Dr. Johnson here and Councillor Emma Goodjohn. So each month we provide an update of recommendations made by the committee and formal actions. So it's quite just simple: red, amber, green. If they're red, obviously they're ongoing. If they're green, they're completed. If they're amber, it can still be ongoing. So we just take the green ones come off each month. So the ones that are on their green will come off the next month update. So in terms of this report in front of members, you'll see that Appendix C contains the response letter from Welsh Government Cabinet Secretary outlining their position regarding additional funding for new legislation. So that was specifically to the Housing and Homelessness Act. Those responses are outlined in paragraphs 4.5 and 4.6 of the report. Looking at Appendix B, responses from Audit Wales in terms of 2 informal actions. Firstly, regarding the review report produced by Deloitte following the judicial review for the tendering process for the demolition of the former Aberforth Power Station. And secondly, on the budget setting process for the Corporate Joint Committee, responses to those 2 queries were sent to committee members last Thursday, 18th of June. So those actions on the tracker can be changed to completed. We are awaiting a response from the Auditor General for Wales around the committee's concern regarding the 6.5 million payout following the judicial review. And we've asked Audit Wales what actions would they be taking to provide reassurance around the public funding that had been lost. So we're still waiting response for that. An email was sent to the Corporate Joint Committee Section 151 officer regarding them attending a future Genius Committee to provide reassurance around the production of the City Deal accounts. But unfortunately, that invitation was declined, and they advised us that updates will be provided through the Section 5151 officer group. And finally, I have made a formal request to Kelly Byrne, the CJC Chief Executive, for them to provide to the Governance Audit Committee an unredacted version of the review report produced following the litigation case to the reward of the tender to the Aberforth Power Station. And that request is currently being considered by the Head of Legal Department. So that's still ongoing. And yes, that's it. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Are there any questions? Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Diolch.
Thank you. Since the relevant officer is sitting next to me this evening, is there a possible update about the officers group on this matter?
evening. I was about to come in actually. So I think there's really positive news on their accounts and their arrangements for producing them. We've actually had the draft accounts as at the 31st of May. So they've really moved things on a bit. And that's a big positive for us because actually, and that will save us time because the operational manager accountancy, Gemma Jones, in compiling our draft accounts, will actually be able to include their draft accounts in the consolidation for the first time. That's caused us a lot of disruption the last few years where we've had to do that consolidation actually during the audit and update our accounts during the audit review period. So it's much more positive than it has been historically.
Any other questions at all? Apologies, Gareth. I might have missed it on the. It's the second action down, which is the council's head of democratic services, alongside the monitoring officer, a review of outside representative and lay members, council committees to increase participation. Is there any update on that one at all?
Not yet. That's still ongoing. Democratic, we've been heavily involved with the scrutiny arrangements, and the next element of that is looking at extra participation across the board. So yes, that's still with the head of Democratic.
So we'll start to see a bit of progress on that over the next few months.
Hopefully, yes. Should do, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on this report? No, I'm not seeing anything on screen. Okay. If I can find my recommendations. So recommended the Governance and Audit Committee notes the contents of the report, makes any comments, and notes the response letter from the then Welsh Government Cabinet Secretary for Housing and Local Government be considered. Someone willing to propose? Thank you, Councillor Ewan Godjohn and Councillor Emma Godjohn. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 10 then, which is the Governance and Audit Committee self-assessment. Who's taking this one? Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides assurance that the Council's Governance and Audit Committee can demonstrate its effectiveness against the good practice principles set out by the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy using the self-assessment tools provided. An auditor within the Regional Internal Audit Service team completed the 2 assessments on Governance and Audit Committee's behalf as follows. Excuse me. SIPFA's Governance and Audit Committee self-assessment of good practice toolkit and evaluating the impact and effectiveness of Governance and Audit Committee in the following 4 areas: good governance, effective control environment, management of risk, and reporting to stakeholders and community. The auditor worked through the self-assessment tool questions, collected evidence, and reviewed Governance and Audit Committee meetings to answer the questions posed. A draft document was collected and circulated to Governance and Audit Committee members in April and in May of this year to provide an opportunity to reflect on the auditor's responses and make observations and comments. Appendix A to the audit report includes the 2 completed self-assessment tools. The audit report identifies that Governance and Audit Committee scored 87.5% on the self-assessment of good practice toolkit, indicating that the committee demonstrates a high level of performance against SIPFA's good practice principles. The Governance and Audit Committee has demonstrated a sufficient impact within their scope of influence on the promotion of good governance and effective public reporting, supporting effective risk management arrangements and contributing to the development of effective control environment across the Council. You'll see from the report there were no high or medium priority recommendations made as a result of the audit, but 4 low priority recommendations were made to strengthen the Governance and Audit Committee, the Governance and Audit Committee's conformance with SIPFA's best practice guidance. These recommendations are contained within the audit report at Appendix A, and service managers have agreed to consider implementing these with the exception of 1 recommendation on page 8 of 24 of your pack, recommendation 1.4, where a manager's comment has been inserted. This was a very detailed piece of work undertaken by one of the audit team, and it's very different to what we have done previously. We hope you found it of value, and we do intend to repeat the process probably every couple of years, but the next exercise we will try and find a better way to engage with members of the committee to have more input into the review. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Are there any questions at all? No? Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for that report. Obviously, as I've mentioned several times, I am new to this committee, but the recommendations set before us make sense from what I can see, apart from perhaps the one which is regarding hybrid meetings and people joining on screen throughout the meeting. I know that there's a comment about the fact that it's not always possible in the present system, but then again, there is something within this recommendation that those who attend online are sort of less apparent than those who are in the chamber, because in reality you only see who is speaking in the chamber as well if you are online. So it's a different way of dealing with this. If you make something entirely digital, entirely virtual, it is possible to see everybody on screen because everybody can have their cameras on at once. But in the current order, where things happen in a hybrid manner, and of course by now we don't do things exclusively in person apart from very special circumstances, because to all intents and purposes it's now against the law, and we know that we do things in a hybrid manner, and the Democratic Services wish to expand this in the future, not to reduce it. So that, I believe, that hybrid method has become the normal method. If you attend, if you are taking part, you are on the screen, and you are taking part if you're on the screen or at home or you're in the room. If you have faith that those people are actually there, and I have no reason to believe that anybody isn't truly part of the conversation, but who knows, perhaps sometimes people could turn up in person and not pay attention either. I don't see that that is true either. If people have reasons to think that anybody at home isn't the one named on the screen and has had access to that link through some kind of fraudulent activities, or if people think that somebody isn't there at all. But to me, I don't think this is a sincere problem for us as a council, and there's no evidence to suggest this. But everything else, that sounds like sensible recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Did you want to come back in, Chair?
Yes, Thank you for your question. I take on board exactly what you've said about the hybrid approach is the way forward, obviously, and virtually people can see the screens. I think this review was done by an auditor based on her observations. She looked at some video footage and noted the discussions and dialogue, and so put forward a suggestion that perhaps the interaction and the dialogue could be improved. However, taking on board the functionality that we've got in this council that doesn't offer that facility, that's why the recommendation was low priority. It was to consider change in practice or consider alternative practice. We've spoken to the service concerned, and although it's not physically possible using the system currently, there may be a development moving forward. There's no indication of fraud or anyone not being present or any concerns like that. It was purely an opinion from the auditor to try and enhance the debate.
Just in Noddy and
Just to note very quickly then, as an area, there are several locations in the Vale which face a challenge with a lack of reliable internet connections, sometimes during the daytime. And this is one of the reasons why there is a challenge for some people. So it is something that is a technical challenge. But I just wanted a bit of clarity about the scoring, because it says that the committee has reasonable assurance, but also it says 175 out of a possible 200 using that device. So I just wanted some assurance that we are not being punished in any way, because it can be a bit controversial in terms of that point. If you're being punished, I feel like it should be for a failure rather than something that is a point to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Certainly, no, you're not being punished as far as the assurance level within the report. As I said, this was done as a desktop assessment by one auditor based on the evidence that was available at the time, and it was her opinion. There were some, obviously there was not much input from members, and as I said, it was based on the evidence available at the time, so the scope was quite contained just to the toolkit questions. Because of those boundaries involved as far as the toolkit questions and within the framework that we were working towards, we felt that the SIPFA definition of reasonable assurance audit opinion was a fair reflection in this instance. If we'd have done a wider piece of work, perhaps with a lot more engagement with yourselves as members, maybe we would have felt more comfortable making that that different assurance opinion, but we felt based on the situation and the work we did, reasonable assurance was the most appropriate. And it's by no means, I mean, reasonable assurance is good, so it's not a criticism of anything. Hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I fed that back to you as part of the process as well, in terms of that question about reasonable assurance versus substantial assurance and 87.5%. I think with this one, I think there is a missed opportunity here around that engagement with members. I think checklists serve a purpose, but they're not great at really assessing effectiveness. They're great at assessing whether you've ticked the box, but not great at assessing how effective the committee is in its role. So I'm glad to hear that you said in your introduction that this would be something perhaps to repeat and engage with members. I think that would add a lot more value. And I wonder as well, building on Councillor Johnson's point regarding the low recommendations. I mean, looking through those recommendations, again, I fed this back in the email as part of the process, but the risks aren't really risks. There isn't a consequence to them. They're a cause, though, not non-compliance with SIPFA's code or best practice guidance. But so what? What's the impact on the local authority? So I wonder whether there's an opportunity to bring in like suggestions rather than recommendations. So you have high, medium, low recommendations where they are actual recommendations because there's a risk. But a suggestion is something where you say, well, you could do this. You could try and put in a place a system that enables everyone on screen or something like that. Whether that could be something that be considered. But I wonder your thoughts on those points, Joan.
Yeah, thank you for that. Apologies if you felt that the potential risk didn't really reflect the finding. That's something maybe we need to look at more clearly. A low priority recommendation, as I said, is in line with the SIPFA definition. It's made for managers to consider to improve best practice. We just felt that in this case, we made them a recommendation just to improve the position to improve the statement of purpose, to include ethics. So it is a recommendation because there are actions to be taken. I think it's the risk we needed to look at, and that's something I'll take on board and make sure it's clearer moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Joan. Any other questions at all? Any comments? Not seeing anything online. Okay, so we're asked to note the outcome of the self-assessment of the effectiveness of the Governance and Audit Committee. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Ewan, good John, and Councillor Johnson, thank you. Moving on to item 11 now. This is the annual internal audit report, and that looks like that's back to you, Joan.
Yes, Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say Andrew Wathen sends his apologies, the Head of Internal Audit. This is his annual internal audit report, and he ideally would have liked to present this, but he's had a clash of meetings tonight, so I'm going to talk you through it. So this report provides the Head of Internal Audit's annual opinion on the Council's control environment in relation to governance, risk management and internal control. It also informs the Governance and Audit Committee of the work and performance of internal audit for the financial year 25-26. This is an information report to ensure the Regional Internal Audit Service continues to be compliant with the global internal audit standards. It includes the Head of Internal Audit's annual opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework in respect of governance, risk management and control for 25-26. And this year, the opinion is of reasonable assurance. The annual internal audit report is at Appendix A, which summarises the reviews undertaken and the detail behind how that opinion was made. So if I just take you to Appendix A, and I'll just quickly talk through the key information within that report. So section 1 is the introduction. Section 2 summarises the reviews undertaken in 25-26. These were brought to you throughout the year through progress against the plan, but table 2 within the report at page 119 in your pack gives you a summary of the 49 audit opinions that the audits that gave audit opinions during the year. You'll see from that 2 were limited assurance and the rest were substantial or reasonable assurance, which is a really, really healthy position to be in. If I move you down, table 3 then compares those audit opinions to previous years. So as I said, only 4% were of limited assurance, 96% of opinions were substantial or reasonable. The 2 limited assurance reports have been brought to this committee previously and highlighted the key issues that were identified then. Moving down to table 4 of the report, it again summarises the position. So at the year end, there were 49, as I said, audits completed with an opinion. There were 11 audits that were in progress and carried forward, or not started and have been considered for inclusion in the 26-27 plan. And then there are 17 audits that were completed, but there's no opinion attached to those due to the nature of the work. So overall, completion of the plan was 86%. As I touched on just now, limited assurance opinion reports have been brought to this committee previously. There were only 2. One was vehicle fuel management, and the key issues are identified in 3.2 of Appendix A. And the second one was corporate building compliance. Just to note that those recommendations made were all approved and the implementation is being monitored through our normal practices. Follow-up audits are undertaken to provide assurance when there's been previous limited assurance audit opinions. During 25-26, there were 3 of these undertaken, and all 3 showed improvements, and therefore the opinions were reasonable. Section 4 of the report are recommendations are made. Again, this is a regular item that we bring to committee, so you've monitored this throughout the year. So in summary, in table 5, I've summarised there the number of recommendations that were made during 25-26. Again, this is very encouraging. There was only 7 high priority recommendations, and within table 5, it shows you the themes, the audits that were where those recommendations were made. There were 116 medium priority recommendations and 140 low priority recommendations. Section 5 is counter fraud work. This is a very short information, high level. Committee will get the annual corporate fraud report brought here to the next meeting. But for as far as this report is concerned, it just highlights the fact that we work very closely with the council's corporate fraud officer. We get involved if there's any referrals into counter fraud and corruption work, and in table 6 it shows you there was 2 last year, and it describes the high level what that investigation or fact-finding exercise was and what the outcome was of that work. Moving on to section 6, key performance measures. At the end of every audit, we issue a client satisfaction questionnaire. Annex 4 to this report shows you the questions that we ask. It was encouraging. 58 questionnaires were issued during 25-26, with 41 being returned, a return rate of 71%, which has improved on previous years. Within the analysis, there's a question, how would you rate the usefulness of the audit? So this is the one we analysed further, and we were encouraged that the rate of satisfaction to this question was 88%. The client also has an opportunity to make comments as well, which we take on board, and we're always happy to take positive and negative comments because we're always trying to learn and improve. In the report, there are some examples of some of the comments we've received during the year from those surveys. Section 7 is the staff training. We always want to develop our staff to make sure they become the best that they can be. It's very encouraging. We took on 2 graduate auditors coming up 3 years ago. They're almost at the end of their professional CIPFA qualification, awaiting their final exam results. So that's a good example of us growing our own. Also, we've got 4 auditors that are studying the Certified Internal Auditor qualification and are progressing well. In addition to that, I've listed there some of the other online learning that the team have undertaken as a whole to self-development and to satisfy CPD requirements. The only benchmarking that we've done recently is internally, where we set ourselves a target of 80% to complete the plan, and we did complete 86% of the plan in this year, which was encouraging. However, the Welsh Chief Auditors Group used to undertake a benchmarking exercise regionally. This has now been reinstated, so hopefully next year we'll have a lot more data that we can give to you for comparison purposes. Section 9 is the Global Internal Audit Standards and sets out what internal audit is about and how it fits in. Section 10 is the Regional Internal Audit Service Progress. It just gives you a little bit of background of how the regional service came about and any changes or improvements that have been made throughout the year, and obviously we're always looking to improve and our service. We have undertaken some internal audit work this year for the Welsh Local Government Association that was well received, and we've also had a commitment to continue that in 26-27. Finally, section 11 takes you to the opinion statement. So this is where all that information that we've gone through is brought together and enables the head of audit to provide his opinion. So you'll see it split into 3. There's risk management, which is given substantial assurance, governance arrangements, reasonable assurance, and internal control, reasonable assurance. So from all that information, the head of internal audit has come to the conclusion that the council as a whole has reasonable assurance on the council's framework of governance, risk management and control for 25-26. And this information will be fed into the annual government statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Any questions at all? Councillor Goodjohn.
Thanks, Vice Chair. So it's a shame that Andrew isn't here to answer these questions because they are quite high level, but you're welcome to attempt them or welcome to skip them as you so wish. So the first one is from the perspective of internal audit. The evidence that's being given to supply these opinions I'm interested in. So what's been stated is the audits that you have performed and the performance of them. What's been stated is the follow-up reviews of actions that haven't been undertaken, any significant recommendations from the outcome of those audits. These are the kind of evidence you're taking on board to make these assurances to us. However, I'm interested as to your perspective if we're having enough of a view of any areas of the council that we're not auditing within that year, that we do every few years, is being missed out from that perspective of the overall assurance that we get at the end of the day. And if there are any other aspects of risk management or governance that you believe are being missed out when these assurances are final opinions on assurance are being given to us.
Thank you. What am I doing? Sorry. Thank you for your question. Yeah, as you know, and you'll see from the next item, the annual internal audit plan tries to assess the main areas of risk and where internal audit should focus their resources. So at the beginning of 25-26, that exercise was undertaken, and the plan that you had in front of you was a plan that we felt would provide enough coverage to provide assurance across the council. There is room for manoeuvre within there. There is a line for if there's any emerging risks during the year, and we can change our resources to focus on those. As we also take assurance from external work, so Audit Wales work, Estin, and CSSIW. So we try and look across the horizon. So in answer to your question, we feel that our internal audit plan will give us enough assurance for internal audit coverage with the resources that we've got. We do be mindful of the other things, and obviously we'd always like to do more, but within the resources we've got, we feel we do enough coverage. Thank you.
And just my other question is, coming out of the perspective of internal audit, the overall evaluation of our governance procedures is considered as part of our annual self-assessment, which is coming up very soon through the scrutiny process. I'm just interested if you're aware of this process and the evidence that's given when we provide a opinion based on our own findings of how good our governance is. So I would just read from you last year's evidence that was given to assess ourselves that our governance was good. So the evidence that was given was the panel performance assessment that was performed, the annual governance statement, which comes directly from the internal audit report, the internal audit report, and the 3 assurance opinions that were given to us, and the action tracker of external regulators. Now, to me, and this is a personal opinion that I'll bring to scrutiny, is I don't feel that gives us enough coverage of our overall governance. That gives us an overall coverage of our internal audit, not of our governance, right? I'm interested if you think that internal audit in of itself can be used as a mechanism to determine how good the entire governance of the council is. And you're welcome to skip this question because it's quite broad, but you're welcome to take it.
So Andrew, in writing his report and the work that he does with me and an SLT, will take assurance from a number of places. And you've mentioned a number of the key ones there. For me, amongst that, those various reports and work, the AGS, the Annual Governance Statement, is the one that's the umbrella over the top in terms of governance, because that's the assessment that we make of our compliance with our own code of corporate governance. So that is the holistic one that looks across the piece. And that's why that is a component of the council statutory reporting at year end. That feeds into the, it's a key component of the statement of accounts. And for the reader of the accounts, they know that those, the numbers in the accounts have got good provenance because there's a good set of governance behind them. So AGS for me is a really important one, and that's not diminishing the work that Andrew and team do on the audit plan. One of the other things, and I see this firsthand, is I see the attention that the senior leadership team give to governance. They give plenty of time to the discussions around the audit plan, and they all feed into the risks, and I have an opportunity to do that with the audit team as well, for my broad knowledge around the risks at the council. And they're very active during the year, not just making sure that the plan's delivered, and we push that, and that's really positive that 86% of the audit plan was delivered this financial year, but also making sure that those outstanding items from historical reports are actually monitored and understood as well. So I think I'm really content with the overall governance arrangements at the council.
Just to come back, just to clarify that none of this is a criticism of internal audit or their work whatsoever, and it's just my understanding of where the information has come from to make these assessments, and my assurance that there isn't a repeat of the same information being used to make multiple different assessments as it goes up the chain. So that's good to hear. So As far as I'm concerned, in this report, from the information gathered, this evidence being used is enough for me to be assured that the opinions given are reliable for this particular report. So that was just where I was getting at, so people understood.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Just a few quick questions, to a certain extent about the methodology. In Appendix A, Table 3, there is a comparison between audit that has happened over the years, and there is a significant reduction between 23-24, where some 12% was restricted in terms of the assurance, to only 2 this year, which have been presented to the committee already. Can we read anything further into that reduction on behalf of the institution, or is this dependent on coincidence in terms of who was being audited this year? And the second part of my question is just regarding setting a target for the department, because that 80% target that has been set, we have reached that target with 86%, but is there anything behind that target? Is that just for internal staff to make sure that they are reaching that level of work? Is there an intention behind that specific target? And any reasoning behind 80% specifically? Thank you.
I'll let Joan come in with some more detail in a moment. But I think Table 3 is important, but there can be some slight cynicism about it, I'm sure. But for me, it is showing that our internal control environment is strengthening over time. I can say that with some confidence, because actually we're looking, when we do the audit plan, it's against the known risks. So we're not looking at approaching it in a different way year on year. And then the other thing, the 80% is to some extent a rule of thumb. But if we've, as a council, set out at the start of the year our risks, and we're actually asking the internal audit team to have a look at them, and then at the end of the year for the head of internal audit to actually make an assessment, which you see at the end of this report, he'll need to do that on a certain level of evidence. And so our rule of thumb is we're saying you need to at least deliver the 80% of the audit plan to be able to give that to some reasonable level of assurance.
Do you want to come in, Joan, on, was there another part of the question?
I think Matt answered most of what I was going to say. Just in respect of the 80%, just bear in mind as well, because we're a regional internal audit service, it's across the three partners, so we have to have a realistic target across the 3. So in order for us to monitor and make sure that we achieve our plan across the 3 councils, we feel that we have to set something. 80% is historic, based on, as Matt said, rule of thumb and previous information. As I said during my presentation, Welsh Chief Auditors have resurrected their benchmarking. They're looking at more indicators, and obviously as that feeds through, we will go in line with those. So it may well change, but yeah, it's to make sure operationally we achieve and we have enough coverage to enable Andrew to give an opinion at the end of the year.
Did you want to come back in there, Councillor Johnson?
Os dwi'n just yn gallu go.
If I can just ask one further question, and perhaps that's just me reading too quickly through the report, but I didn't see any sort of diagram or anything to explain how many people work on each level. Is that something that I've just missed in the report, or is it something that would be a consideration to include, just to have a greater understanding of the composition of the service?
Thank you for your question. That's a really good point. No, we don't include it, but perhaps we should, because I think that would provide more context. So yes, thank you for that. We will definitely include it next time.
Thank you. I think it'd be really good perhaps if we can add, I don't want a massive list, but perhaps if there's specific skill sets as well, like IT audit, for example, and things like that. But again, it would just help with that coverage there. I've got 3 hopefully quick ones. One's linked to that table 3, that comparison again. Each year the numbers go down in terms of the number of audits. So 56 in 23-24, then 53, now 49. Just whether that's something that's just, are we doing like longer audits, or are we doing them differently, or is that something that from this committee's point of view we need to be concerned about in terms of resourcing? The second question is regarding table 5 in 4.2, which is the analysis of recommendations made. Given in the review of the Governance and Audit Committee effectiveness, we didn't, or management didn't accept one of the recommendations. They said they weren't going to do it. I'm just wondering, there's nothing in here about recommendations that aren't going to be implemented. So just wondered if that's how, you won't probably be able to answer off the top of your head, but whether there is a number of recommendations that aren't going to be implemented out of that 263. And my last question is regarding the governance arrangements opinion. The last paragraph in the box in Appendix A says no other significant issues were identified, but I didn't actually read anything above it that suggests there was an initial issue to which the other then follows. Again, happy for you to take these offline rather than, that's in the Appendix A. There's the 3 boxes, one for risk management, one for governance arrangements, and one for internal control. It's just the last paragraph against governance arrangements. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Nigel. As far as the last comment, that is probably a typo. I haven't got to it, but we can look at that. Yeah, I think that's poor wording, to be honest. I think that's poor wording. We'll look at that. As far as table 3 is concerned, and the observation that the number of audits have gone down year on year, that's a timing issue as far as 25-26 is concerned. In another table, it said that we had 11 audits that, I think it was 5 ongoing and 6 considered for the previous year. So those 5 ongoing, if they'd have completed, we would have been nearer where we would have liked to have been. So that is pure timing with concluding the audit to a draft report stage where we could give an opinion. So we do try to achieve the plan, and that, like I said, is a timing issue. And as far as table 5 is concerned, and the question in respect of recommendations, as you know, we bring a recommendation monitoring report to you regularly. We do track high and medium priority recommendations. We don't track low priority recommendations. The one we discussed earlier was a low priority recommendation, so that's not actually included on Annex 3 in Appendix A, but the rest of them are in there, and if any weren't agreed, they would be showing it in that annex.
I think I've got, because table 5 analysis recommendations does include the lows, so it suggests that there are 140 that will be implemented regardless of whether you follow up on them or not, but that may not be the case if some of those haven't been accepted. So I just wonder whether that's, again, something to look at in terms of clarity of what are we expecting to be implemented by the organisation, whether internal audit followed up on them or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we'll be clear on that. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
Great, thank you. Lovely, okay. Okay, go on then, Councillor Goodjohn.
Just based on what you asked, just with the Appendix A, can we just ask Andrew for after the meeting some information as to why, based on the fact there was no issues with governance, it was given a reasonable assurance and not a substantial assurance? Just want to know why. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Okay, any further questions? Any comments? Okay, thank you, Joan, for that, and well done on the interrogation that followed as well, so well done. Okay, so moving on to item 12, which is, so can we have a proposer and seconder for the recommendations? Councillor Ewan Goodjohn, Councillor Emma Goodjohn, thank you. Item 12 then, internal audit, annual strategy and risk-based plan. If you've managed to get your breath back, Joan, you can come in on that one.
Thank you, Chair. So again, in line with the global internal audit standards, the head of internal audit must establish a risk-based plan to determine the priorities of internal activity consistent with the organisation's goals. The report is before you, outlines all the things to be considered. So attach Appendix A to the report is the internal audit strategy document for 26-27, and this demonstrates how the internal audit service will be delivered in compliance with the global internal audit standard requirements. Then at the end of Appendix A is the actual proposed risk-based plan for 26-27. If I briefly take you through Appendix A, just to highlight, within that there's a definition of internal audit and the requirement for internal audit. There's also the Section 151 responsibility and how the plan is developed. If I take you to number 7, methodology, that sets out the step-by-step, the process that we go through in order to create the plan. As it says there, we look at all the documentation, reports, etc. that are available to us, including the risk register, the Vale 2030 plan. We also sent out e-forms to chief officers so they could highlight any key concerns, key changes or key risks that they have in their areas, so we can consider those. So it's quite a robust process. We then take it to SLT, where again it's considered at a very high level, and comments and suggestions are made, as Matt described earlier. The plan then that we come up with, as we've touched on earlier, is a plan that we feel will provide enough coverage to give an opinion based on the resources that we have available. If I skip down without talking too much, if I skip to Appendix B of that report, that shows the internal audit plan. Within there, it shows the directorate. So there are some cross-cutting pieces of work, but then there's service-specific or directorate-specific work. It gives you the area that we're going to be looking at and a very high-level scope or risk. Obviously, once the plan or that audit is allocated, that scope is discussed and refined. But that there gives you assurance that the plan covers across the whole of the organisation. There's also in there provision for any emerging risks, so the plan can be flexible if we have got provision in there to a certain extent to take on anything, or we would come back to you if the plan was to change significantly due to any other emerging risks. I think that's all I want to say, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Are there any questions? Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Joan. To an extent, I'm not sure if it's so much as a question, but I'm just looking once again at the amount of work that the service has to achieve. Am I correct to say that you completed 49 of these in the previous year, but that there's a further 17, I think you mentioned 17, that did not have any opinion from the audit given to them, so that makes some 67 in total. And just working out in my head in terms of the amount of work in terms of that 67, and if you're intending to do 64 this time round, but we're targeting 80% of those to be completed, I'm just trying to get my head around the targets and the amount of work if you're not necessarily expecting the entirety of the work to be completed. I hope this makes sense as a question. When I write a to-do list, for example, I expect to tick off every item on that list because that is my intention. I don't complete 80% of it. So I'm just trying to get my head around how much of that work you do expect to be completed and how you decide not to do something if there are too many targets, if there's too much pressure. So just an explanation of that would greatly help me to understand your process. And just for information, if I understand it correctly, there is between 51 in Appendix B. There is a typo because it refers to the previous one, which is 50. So where it says compliance expenses mileage claims and it mentions the governance and audit committee, and I'm sure this is intentional to make sure, of course, that we as a committee are thoroughly reading through the proposed programme for the new year, but I'm just raising that and I hope it's the only typo there. But yeah, just to note that. If you could answer the question, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for spotting the typo. Yeah, we will correct it. Apologies for that. As far as your understanding is concerned, it is correct. That 64 does include the non-opinion related work as well, so the equivalent to the 17 that I mentioned in the 25-26. Ideally, we would love to complete the full plan. That is our aim. We wouldn't aim just to do 80%. And it would be great if we could. We've set a plan based on the number of the resources we've got available, which equates to the number of days that we've got available, and that's across the three partners. As I said, we try to do them all. Things happen during the year. It may be that, you know, things change or certain auditees aren't available, timing issues, but we do set out always to try and do as much as we can, and so the 100%. As the year goes on, obviously we bring progress against the plan to this committee. You'll see then which ones we've completed, which ones we've allocated, which ones we can't start. If during that year it becomes apparent that there's certain audits that we can't start for whatever reason, we would raise that with yourself, so you would know that, and then we would make a decision whether we replace it with another one or whether we just push it forward or what. But we do bring that progress against the plan to yourselves, so you're informed as we go through the year. But we are trying to do as much as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, just a minute one for once. The procurement audit, I recall last time that this was undertaken was just before we had the task and finish on procurement come from the Resources Committee. So I'm just interested if the audit's going to purely conduct an audit based on legislation and based on the requirements of what it has to perform as a duty, or if it's going to look a little bit wider at our requirements under Project Zero and the new policies that have been put forward by Matt, included as part of the procurement policy process, and how we are complying with our own policies on top of the regulations that have been newly added to the council.
Thank you again for the question. As I said, there's a very overarching kind of scope in the pack as number 10, procurement. So we haven't actually drilled down into the specifics, but we certainly would always look at the policies and procedures and legislation that would be a given, regardless of what action we're going to take. So yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah, just because there's a difference between something that's just basing the legislation only and the policies only, and also looking at effectiveness, as we've talked about before. There's a difference in those kinds of audits, right?
We're obviously a very diverse organisation with many of our directorates and services potentially entering into contracts with similar suppliers or the same suppliers. So some of this audit is to make sure that we're complying with the overall regulations, given the total spend we have as an organisation. So it's quite an important thing against for assurance for me.
Great, thank you. I think there's no other questions on at the moment. I think we've mentioned in previous years, going back to Councillor Johnson's question about, I think when I first started, we had high, medium, low categorisations, but I think all of them were high. And then we asked, could that be broken down? I think it couldn't. So there's a certain element in here where we're having to place faith in the internal audit team in terms of those ones during the year that are based around the organisation's key risks will happen and they'll be prioritised. I totally understand that that is also driven by the skills within the audit team and availability of the auditors. But I think it's just something for the notes, really, from my perspective and previous conversations we've had over previous years, is that this plan needs to provide the assurance to the organisation that it needs to provide. There is a certain limit to that, and therefore we need to rely on the risk information in here, the links with the risk management processes, the Section 151 officer, and the assurance that then comes through this plan. So I think the information we have in here does that to an extent, but I'm very conscious of the fact we are relying heavily on the internal audit team to make judgments on our behalf, in a sense, regarding those risk areas. So yeah, no question in there, but I think just a comment to note, and obviously the more help that the internal audit team can give us throughout the year in terms of why things might not be done, why things will be done, and all those sorts of things would be really appreciated. Okay, any other comments at all? Not seeing anything on the screen. In which case we are asked to consider and approve the draft internal audit strategy and draft annual risk-based plan. Are we happy to do that? Proposed by Councillor Ewan Goodjohn and seconded by Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Okay, item 13 then is the recommendation monitoring report. Joan, hi.
Thank you. So at the request of the Chair of the Governance and Audit Committee, I think last time or the time before, this report provides members of the committee with an update from the relevant service managers on the status of recommendations made in audits issued prior to 25-26, which have yet to be implemented. The comments have been agreed by the relevant heads of service or directors and discussed at senior leadership team. If I just take you into the report on 4.1, Table 2, that provides a summary of the number of recommendations that we're talking about. So you can see from the table in 23-24, 161 high and medium priority recommendations were made, and yet there's 2 that are still yet to be implemented. And in 24-25, there was 117 have been made, and 110 have been implemented and 7 yet to be implemented. So we're talking about 9 recommendations. Those 9 recommendations are attached to Appendix A. Service managers were contacted and asked to provide updates on the progress being made to implement each recommendation and to provide assurance that any risks are being mitigated in the meantime. We also gave them the opportunity to provide another date if necessary, a realistic date where they considered that those actions would be completed and therefore the recommendation implemented. All that information, as I said, is collated in Appendix A. And you can see that they've given us dates now that they're happy for us to be monitored against, and within the current position management update highlighted in yellow, it explains any mitigating actions that have been put in place in the meantime. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Any questions? Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Diolch.
Thank you, Joan. They are all subjects which are very interesting, but I've lost myself. I don't seem to be on the screen. Perhaps I'm running out of battery. Oh, there I am. Sorry, now that I'm appearing on screen, I'll speak and re-ask my question. They're all very interesting subjects, which is why the recommendations have been set out in the first instance. But it is noted, just as in the previous item with Tom, that target date has been revised on several occasions. You can see so here. Is there a sincere expectation to achieve these things which are so difficult to achieve? Because we've been here for several years now, and I understand why it happens. I understand the difficulty. I understand the very sticky issues. But is there an expectation for us to be able to achieve these before the next target date? Or is it just going to roll over to the next quarter and the quarter after that? That's the reason that I want to ask about this. What, are we expected to achieve them sincerely?
Thank you for your question. Very similar to the question posed with Tom earlier. For transparency, we do provide you with the information as when those dates have been pushed forward. The narrative that's highlighted in yellow has changed over time, so the history isn't there. So there would have been reasons why each of these recommendations may have been pushed forward, and any mitigation that has been put in place in the meanwhile. However, this exercise on these 9 service managers, and I said directors have had sight of this as well, have seen these dates, and they've all assured us as much as they can at this present moment in time that these dates are the dates where they feel that the implementation will be achieved, and that's what they'll be monitored against.
If I'm allowed to ask the obvious question, what happens if we do not achieve by the target date? Because there is a reason why the target date is failed in the past. And so what happens if they come back? There's a number of them here. Let's just say by the end of August, the end of July, the end of June even, which is next week. What happens if these haven't been achieved?
I think, sorry, if I just come back in there, first of all, we have discussed this as a committee previously about some of these, and in particular those first 2 that are on there, which are extremely old and significant risks as well. I think in particular the first one, I had a look back to the previous report on this to see the progress, and based on the comments here, I am pleased to see the progress made in relation to that one. It sounds like we're nearly there. I know there was a software procurement that went on in there and implementing new processes, but I think with that first one, we're definitely at the point that if that 31st of July 2026 date is not met, we need to be, sorry, yeah. Oh, after, okay, thank you. Yeah, we need to be asking the recommendation owner to be coming into this committee to state why it hasn't been able to be completed and when it will, and hold them to account for that. The second one, the Ysgoloderi and St Si's building compliance follow-up, again, it's a bit more tricky probably because that's around head teachers, but again, I think we just need to be looking into a way of doing that. But I think there is that point that the committee has discussed before about bringing people into this committee to hold them to account where those dates are not being met. Those 2, I think, are key on here. Others, personally, I'm not so concerned about. Yes, there are some extensions to dates, but they're more recent audits. That first one, the PCI DSS one, the original report was 2023, so obviously that's an older one. I don't know whether anyone else has any comments in relation. Councillor Johnson, did you want to come back in there, or?
A general comment first, and it's really important that the internal audit team and SLT stay on top of these. We will see them through, and we're not letting anybody off the hook for any of them. So there's a huge amount of scrutiny to make sure they're going through. As you rightly say, there have been quite a number of updates on the PCI when it's really important. We are on the home straight with it, but I think, and it's common with a number of these, we're operating in a fluid environment, so things change and our actions need to change. And it mentions the telephony platform, so we've changed telephony. We need another assessment. Thankfully, we've been able to engage the same people who did that external assessment for us previously, so there's some continuity and they understand this piece, because it is quite a big piece of work to understand our level of compliance. So I'm confident we'll get there by the end of July on this one, and I know Gemma too wants to see the back of this one very much.
I think that just the bit to be conscious of, however much the processes change and the world moves on, the risk still remains. And that's the bit that we just need to be conscious of and make sure that because there are big consequences for the local authority if we don't get that compliance in place. Did you want, you're happy? Yeah. Councillor Goodjohn, did you want to come in?
Yeah, can I, just ask that the Vice Chair and the Chair, alongside officers, continue their engagement as to regarding whether it's time to bring in operational managers in to discuss these specific risks. But, the inevitable thing is that no operational manager wants to set back their target date like this 4 or 5 times. That, no one is going to do that unless it's absolutely necessary to do, especially when it can bring them in trouble with SLT or with ourselves. But, it has been a good mechanism when it comes to newly arising recommendations that have been set back a couple of times, that having that risk of coming into the committee and then them having to have a discussion with us does tend to speed things along more often than not. But there are some of these that go far beyond what we can do as a committee, and we have to accept that is to some extent going to be the circumstances until the machine can work around whatever the massive hurdle has been set up before them. So inevitably that will happen to some extent with a big organisation.
Great, thank you. So I think, if we can just make sure that it's understood that we are still focusing on particularly those first two and making sure they happen. Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask one further question, and that's specifically about that last one, which is small business tax. And I'm asking this not only as a member of the council, but also as a ward representative, which includes the middle of Barry, because I've had many people ask me about the small business tax and have been waiting for a while for an answer from the department. So I'm pleased to see that there is this increased staff resource. I just want to specify, when we're talking about the 2nd of June, we're talking about 3 weeks ago, the start of this month, and so this should be on the horizon, shouldn't it? If you can respond to that.
So this is one of my teams, so I can come in and cover this one. So I think the important thing to note is an assessment is made. So an officer in the team makes an assessment at the point in time, and what this action, rightly from the internal audit team when they've come and reviewed the process and procedures, is that we do undertake some review and checking that we're making the appropriate awards. So the issue is here around the resources and the extent that we're able to do that. So there's been a little bit to and fro with internal audit, what that actually looks like. So there is now some additional staff resource that's come into place from the start of June. The resource is being trained up, and we'll have that process up and running. We won't be able to review 100% of all the assessments are made, given the volume of transactions activity in the team, but we will be having us taking a sample and reviewing in that way.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Okay, any other questions? Any other comments? Okay, we're being asked to note the report, so can I have a proposer? Councillor Johnson and Councillor Goodjohn, thank you. Okay, pleased to hear through my poor chairing, which Gareth was here to show me how it's done, but we are on to the last item now, which is the forward work programme. So This one, it's this. Gareth, who's Joan? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the final one. It's a standard report that you get at each Governance and Audit Committee. Within it, it sets out the proposed agenda for the next meeting, which is on the 20th of July. You'll see that there's 11 items there. Also attached to Appendix A is the schedule proposed for the ongoing year. However, that can be flexible and amendments can be made as necessary. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Yeah, Councillor Goodjohn.
Can we, on the subject of next meeting's agenda, can we be logical about this and do a little bit of reshaping? Because if we're not going to have an additional meeting for any of these specific items, special meeting, and that's perfectly fine, it's a long agenda. Can we take out some reports that are just to note that we see very regularly, that we'll see very soon anyway, or bump them over to September's meeting if we weren't going to see them next meeting in September anyway? Can the chair, vice chair, officers just take a look and try and minimise the number of items as far as possible, just because we have some really important statutory business to get on with?
Yeah, we can take that away, and between myself and the chair and Gareth we'll try and streamline the agenda. Absolutely. Are there any other comments, questions or comments? No. We're asked to note, I think, the forward programme. So, can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Emma Goodjohn, Councillor Ewan Goodjohn. Thank you very much. Any items to which the chair has decided are urgent? I am aware of none, and there is no part 2. So I'm happy to declare the meeting over. Thank you very much for everyone's input today and the very constructive conversations. Thank you very much, everyone.